He threw the mop at me like I was trash. It hit the floor with a dull, wet slap showing across the office like a gunshot. Everyone turned. Phones stopped ringing. Fingers froze over keyboards. And then came his voice. Cleaning is the only thing your brain can handle, Chloe. Don't screw that up too. That was the moment. Not when he humiliated me in front of the entire executive team. Not when he spat my name like it was something dirty. Not even when I felt my cheeks burn with a rage so quiet, it could have cracked glass. The moment was when I smiled. Because I had been waiting 8 months for that sentence. I picked up the mop, slowly, as if I had all the time in the world. My back was straight, my hands were steady, and I looked him straight in the eye. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I wasn't just another temp worker. I was the one woman capable of dismantling his entire empire. With a single report. He thought I was invisible. Disposable. The girl who showed up with a lunchbox and kept her head down. But I was watching. Memorizing. Recording every policy violation, every stolen paycheck, every verbal attack he dished out like candy. And today? Today, I would finally speak. Have you ever been so furious that you felt completely calm? Because that's what it feels like when the person who spent months breaking you realizes you were never the victim. You were the trap. If you've ever been humiliated by someone in power, this story is for you. Stay until the end because this is how we take them down. Let me take you back. Before the mop. Before the mask slipped. Before I became Chloe Reed, corporate ghost with a memory like a camera and a mission to destroy the most toxic CEO in the healthcare tech industry. It started in Manhattan, in a glass tower called Pulse Vista. And it began with a lie. 3 months before the mop hit the floor, I walked into Pulse Vista's downtown Manhattan headquarters with a fake resume, borrowed name, and just enough nervous energy to pass for a desperate temp. The receptionist didn't look up from her monitor when she said, "You'll be assisting Mr. Cole." I nodded like any new hire would. Quiet. Compliant. Invisible. That's exactly what I needed to be. In reality, I wasn't desperate. Far from it. I was Chloe Reed, senior auditor at Kensley Consulting, the firm Fortune 100 companies call when they're about to make deals so massive they could rewrite balance sheets across the globe. My specialty? Corporate culture evaluation. I go undercover to find out what PR departments don't want investors to see. That day, my real ID sat zipped inside my purse, under a spare pair of flats and a pocket-sized recorder I never actually needed. I wasn't there to spy with gadgets. I was the gadget. My brain was trained for total retention eidetic memory. I could recreate conversations word for word, recall the exact tone someone used, or the minute they turned hostile. And I'd been hired to use that skill on Pulse Vista's rising star. Ethan Cole, their charismatic CEO, in waiting. On paper, Ethan was everything a modern company wanted. Harvard, educated, charming, innovative, and laser-focused on expansion. Pulse Vista had just been shortlisted for a $500 million partnership with Global Care Alliance Healthcare Consortium that could launch them into the Fortune 500 overnight. But money like that doesn't just flow based on spreadsheets. Global Care had been burned before. A few years back, they'd signed with a partner who looked perfect on the surface until stories of wage, theft, discrimination, and harassment turned into lawsuits and national headlines. Their board swore it would never happen again. So they hired us. Not to look at numbers, but to look under them. Deep under. That's why I was there. My assignment was simple. Blend in, observe Ethan Cole, and decide if Pulse Vista's culture was truly partnership, worthier a public relations disaster waiting to explode. When I first saw him, he was walking out of the elevator, flanked by 2 senior managers, laughing at something only he seemed to find funny. His suit was sharp, his smile sharper. He glanced at me like I was a misplaced chair and walked on. Not surprising. Men like him always underestimated women like me. They saw the cardigan, the name badge, the cheap flats and assumed they were looking at someone they could control. Good. Let him believe that. The first day, I took notes. The second day, I noticed the receptionist didn't make eye contact with him. The third, a junior staffer asked to switch departments after being called dead weight in front of the entire floor. It was subtle at first. It always is. But underneath the glass walls and artisan coffee and endless motivational posters, I could already feel it, a culture built on fear, dressed up to look like excellence. I kept my head down and waited. The cracks were there. I just needed time to follow them deep enough. And Ethan? He was already helping me dig. On my first Monday at Pulse Vista, Ethan Cole walked past my desk and dropped a stack of folders without a word. No greeting, no eye contact. Just the thud of paper on particle board and a faint scent of designer cologne. 10 minutes later, he called my desk phone from his office. "Chloe," he said flatly, "you forgot to bring the Collins deck to the strategy sink. That's your job, isn't it?" I blinked, confused. "Sir, I haven't been assigned anything yet." Are you correcting me?" His voice didn't rise. It dropped. Quieter, colder. "I asked if you were correcting me." I said no. Of course I said no. He hung up without another word. At first, I chalked it up to a miscommunication. First week hiccup. Happens in fast-paced companies, right? But then came Tuesday. He asked me to schedule his week. I did. I color-coded his calendar, checked every time zone twice, even confirmed his dentist appointment personally with their receptionist. At 12:06 p.m., he stormed into the break room and hissed, "I take lunch at noon. Always noon. You booked my cleaning during my recharge window. I don't work hungry, Chloe. Fix it." By Wednesday, the pattern was clear. Ethan wasn't chaotic. He was deliberate. Every task came with a trap. Every instruction came with enough ambiguity to make failure almost guaranteed. And when the inevitable mistake happened, he never missed a chance to weaponize it. He'd stand in the middle of the floor, loudly announcing how the new girl needed help understanding basic workflows. In meetings, he'd say things like, "Let's have Chloe take notes. She's got a great ear, and not much else." The room would chuckle, but no one laughed with their eyes. Even the long-timers, the ones who'd clearly survived a few cycles of this, kept their smiles tight and their voices low. I started to notice the way people disappeared. One day, a marketing associate's nameplate was gone. The next, an engineer's desk was cleared before lunch. No goodbye emails. No HR memos. Just vanished. Like they were never there. There was a rhythm to it. Praise, pressure, punishment, then poof, replacement. Ethan ran his team like a pressure cooker. He didn't just want results, she wanted obedience. Controlled fear. Everyone was replaceable, and he made sure they knew it. Even the performance reviews were coded warnings. Needs improvement. Meant, your time's running out. Good effort. Meant, I'm watching you closer now. Outstanding? That just meant, I'll raise the bar next quarter so you fail. I documented everything. Not just what he said, but how people reacted to it. The stiff backs, the flinches. The employees who paused an extra second before replying, calculating if a truth was worth a reprimand. And the scariest part? They all thought it was normal. This wasn't some outburst or bad day. It was the culture. And Ethan Cole was its architect. By week 2, I stopped wondering whether Ethan Cole was just another bad boss. He wasn't. He was strategic. Cruelty, for him, wasn't a personality flaw. It was a leadership model. There was a moment, I remember it clearly. Tuesday morning, team sync, 10 people packed into the glass-walled war room with cold coffee and lukewarm enthusiasm. I had barely set down the meeting notes when Ethan walked in, tossed his phone onto the table, and said, "Let's start by learning from Chloe's mistakes." Just like that. No context. No warning. He clicked the wall screen and pulled up a spreadsheet. It was Minioni assigned the night before at 6:42 p.m., marked due by morning. "I want you all to see what happens when someone doesn't triple-check their inputs," he said, circling a small typo with a red laser pointer. Imagine this level of carelessness going to a client. No one spoke. No one moved. They just looked down. What struck me wasn't the public call-out, it was how rehearsed it felt. Like he had planned to open with that. Like humiliating me was just item number 1 on his agenda. When the meeting ended, he leaned in and whispered, "Next time, sleep less." That was when I realized something chilling. He didn't want me to improve. He wanted me to break. The meetings became rituals of domination. I was never introduced by name only as the assistant or the note-taker. He'd make jokes about whether I could spell basic terms or if I needed flashcards to understand acronyms. Once, when a client complimented my prep work, Ethan cut in with a laugh. She probably copied it off Google. I wouldn't trust her with spell check, let alone strategy. The client laughed, but it was polite, hollow. And when Ethan walked away, the man gave me a look I couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe. Or confusion, like he was wondering if I was in on the joke or part of it. I was neither. I was just documenting it all. That's what I kept reminding myself, over and over again. This is data. This is evidence. But it was more than that. It was a mirror. Ethan didn't just want to lead. He wanted to define reality, rewrite the rules of workplace dignity until every eye avoided his, every voice stuttered before responding, every conversation ended with someone walking away smaller than they arrived. And the scary part? It worked. I watched coworkers nod along with his insults, like they were just part of the job. I watched people flinch when their names were called like school kids waiting to be scolded. I watched new hires go from confident to cautious in under a week. Ethan's control wasn't built on loyalty. It was built on exhaustion. And slowly, painfully, I began to understand. His cruelty wasn't random. It was engineered. The joke was never just a joke. The deadline was never just a deadline. It was all part of a system, a psychological chokehold dressed up as corporate discipline. But here's the thing about systems. Once you map them, you can dismantle them. And I had just begun drawing the blueprint. The first one to crack was Ella Martin from finance. She'd been with Pulse Vista for nearly a decade, sharp, efficient, respected. The kind of woman who color-coded reports before it was trendy. You could tell she took pride in her work. She came in early, stayed late, never complained. But Ethan noticed her anyway. It started small, like it always did. A passive-aggressive, "Are we sure this is accurate?" during a budgeting meeting. Then a sarcastic, "Guess who forgot the updated metrics?" when she was 2 minutes late uploading a quarterly revision. By week 3, he was calling her Spreadsheet Ella in front of the team. At first, it sounded like a joke, but it wasn't. "You know how Ella is," he'd smirk. "Great at numbers, not so much at people, or planning, or time management." The worst part? No one defended her. Not because they didn't care, but because they'd seen what happened to people who did. I watched her shrink day by day. Her posture slouched, her voice lost its steady confidence. She stopped speaking in meetings unless directly called on, and even then, her eyes stayed fixed on her notepad. Then came the day she cried. Ethan had berated her in front of the entire executive panel for irresponsible budget padding, even though the error had come from a file sent by his own assistant. When Ella tried to explain, he cut her off with a single word. "Excuses." That was the only thing he said. Excuses. She didn't show up the next morning. Or the day after. Her desk was cleared by Friday. HR said she'd taken personal leave. No one said goodbye. She wasn't the only one. Marcus Lynn, from development, left 2 weeks later. Marcus was quiet but brilliant tone of the engineers behind Pulse Vista's patient monitoring interface. Ethan had zero technical background, but that never stopped him from nitpicking line by line through Marcus's code. "I don't care how complex it is," Ethan once snapped. "If a 6-year-old can't explain it, it's useless." When Marcus pushed back politely, I might add Ethan made sure his next 3 assignments were due simultaneously, each with impossible timelines. He failed to meet them, of course. And that's when Ethan struck. See? He told the room. Brilliant on paper. But paper doesn't write code. Marcus handed in his resignation the following Monday. He didn't even finish the week. I began to keep a private list in my notebook. Not just Ethan's violations, but the collateral damage, the ones who cracked, the ones who quit, the ones who learned to stay silent. By week 6, turnover in our department was up 38%. HR blamed market churn. But everyone knew. Everyone saw it. They just wouldn't name it. That's what Ethan was best at, turning accountability into illusion. People didn't quit because of him. They left because they needed a break, or they wanted to realign with new priorities. But behind closed doors, it was always the same story. I can't do this anymore. He makes me feel like I'm nothing. I used to love this job. I listened. I watched. And I recorded everything. Because I knew something they didn't. They were breaking under the weight of his abuse. But I was only getting stronger. It happened on a Thursday. The kind of day where everything feels slightly off. Fluorescent lights flickering. Coffee machines sputtering. Conversations thinner than usual, like everyone was holding their breath without realizing it. I was filing project documents outside the executive wing when I heard Ethan's voice behind the closed glass of conference room B. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His tone was smooth, relaxed, almost pleased. Don't put it in writing, he said. Just frame it as a team-building weekend. Make it sound fun. No one has to know it's mandatory. I froze. Another voice responded, lower, nervous. I couldn't place it. But legally, shouldn't we? Legally? Ethan scoffed. You think Global Care cares how we run our shop? We get results. That's what they want. That's what they're paying for. He paused. They don't ask what it costs to build excellence, and we don't tell them. Something shifted inside me. I'd spent months documenting verbal abuse, psychological manipulation, retaliation tactics, and public humiliation. But this was intentional exploitation. Coercing employees into unpaid weekend work under the guise of voluntary culture bonding? That wasn't just unethical. That was federal wage violation. And he knew it. That moment, something crystallized. Until then, I'd been careful, strategic, detached even. I thought of myself as an observer, a collector of patterns and data points. But now it was personal. He wasn't just cruel. He was calculated, protected, and dangerous. And he had no idea I was the biggest threat in the room. I walked away quietly, but inside, the current shifted. My hands trembled not from fear, but from clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when truth stops being theoretical and becomes weaponized. The next day, I requested to shadow HR meetings under the pretense of learning internal workflows. I cross-referenced policies. I scanned archived memos. I found a pattern of similar voluntary weekends spanning back 3 fiscal quarters. None were recorded as paid time. And all of them bore Ethan's signature. This wasn't just workplace abuse anymore, it was criminal. If you believe toxic leaders must be exposed, hit like and share this story. You never know who else is living it in silence. After hours, I went home and sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. 1 page. 1 pen. I wrote down everything I knew. Names of employees who quit after forced weekend work. Screenshots of internal emails. Meeting logs, timestamps, witness notes. My personal memory, entries word for word conversations, Ethan assumed no one would remember. By the time I finished, I didn't feel tired. I felt ready. Because in every one of Ethan's carefully hidden policies, I saw something else. A crack. And cracks, when mapped carefully enough, always lead to the fault line. Some people think revenge is loud. They picture shouting matches, thrown coffee mugs, dramatic exits with security escorting someone out of the building. But the most effective kind of revenge? It's quiet. It's passionate. It's precise. For the next few weeks, that's who I became. The quiet shadow with a highlighter, a flash drive, and a perfectly straight spine. I played the role so well, even I almost believed it. The underperforming temp. The invisible assistant. The girl who made good coffee and kept her mouth shut. But in the background, I was building something dangerous. I started with the incident logo running document of every unlawful or unethical directive Ethan had ever given me. The date he cut my lunch break to 10 minutes. The day he told me to shred a complaint form from an intern. The time he publicly questioned whether I had a learning disability because I asked him to clarify a vague deadline. Each entry had witnesses, timestamps, and word-for-word quotes from my recall journal. Then I created a second document. The pattern file. This one wasn't about me. It was about everyone else. Ella. Marcus. 2 interns who left after 1 month. A project manager demoted without cause. I charted who left, why they left, and what had happened within 2 weeks of their departure. It was like watching dominoes fall in reversevery. Cruel remark, every impossible deadline, every meeting where a joke landed like a blade. But it wasn't just what he said or did. It was how people responded. That's where the truth lived. In the way team members flinched when his name lit up their phones, in the sudden silence when he entered a room, in the carefully neutral language people used in Slack, like they were writing with a lawyer reading over their shoulders. All of it pointed to one thing: fear. Not respect. Not leadership. Not inspiration. Just fear. I organized the data into 4 categories: verbal abuse, wage violations, retaliatory behavior, manipulated attrition, each with supporting examples, each with real names, real dates, real consequences. I backed up the files on 2 encrypted drives, one hidden in my apartment, the other stored in a safety deposit box under my real name, Chloe Reed, senior auditor at Kensley Consulting. I wasn't just preparing a report. I was sharpening a blade. And Ethan? He kept giving me material. He called me deadweight during a leadership prep session. Made me revise a client handout 12 times because I used too many syllables. Told a vendor in front of me, "Don't mind Chloe, she's still learning what Excel does." Every insult was a gift. Every microaggression, a perfect line in the report. And the closer we got to Global Care's evaluation week, the bolder he became. He didn't know it, but he was writing his own obituary on email, one directive, one dehumanizing sentence at a time. And I was just making sure the punctuation was correct. The morning of the evaluation felt like a different kind of storm. The office was spotless, not just clean-sterilized. The front desk had been redecorated with fresh-cut orchids. Ethan even ordered new branded mugs for the break room. You could feel the pressure in the air, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. At 9:27 a.m., the elevator dinged and the doors opened. 12 executives from Global Care Alliance stepped into the lobby. Clean suits. Serious faces. The kind of people who could reroute $500 million with a single conversation. Ethan met them at the door like a talk show host. Broad grin, perfect handshake. Voice warm, polished, friendly. "Welcome to Pulse Vista," he said. "We're thrilled to show you what we've built here. Not what we are. What we've built." Like the culture was a product he'd sculpted from stone and polished not, a system of intimidation, coercion, and fear. I watched from the corner of the main hallway, mop in hand, just another background blur in a gray uniform. Exactly where he liked me. Exactly where I needed to be. He led the executives through every department like a tour guide at a luxury resort. Showed them the innovation lab. The employee wellness lounge no one ever used. The ping pong table that had been untouched for 6 months. Every word he said was a performance. "Our team retention speaks to our values," he beamed. Pulse Vista isn't just a company, it's a family. We treat every employee as a vital part of our success. I nearly laughed. A family? He couldn't even remember his assistant's last name without checking the directory. I kept cleaning. Calm, quiet. Just outside the glass conference room. And through that thin pane of glass, I heard him begin his pitch. It was everything you'd expect from a man who thought culture was a bullet point. Resilience, agility, collaborative excellence, scalable empathy. Yes, she actually said scalable empathy. This, and the executives nodded, pens scribbling notes, eyes tracking every graph, every projection. They didn't know the man behind the smile. But I did. And today, they were going to meet him. I took one final swipe across the tile, straightened my uniform, and walked to the conference room door. My heart wasn't pounding, it was steady. Controlled. I'd rehearsed this moment so many times it didn't feel real. But it was. And this time, I wouldn't be the girl cleaning up after everyone else's mess. I knocked once. Firmly. Then opened the door. 12 heads turned toward me. Some confused. One or two annoyed. Ethan's eyes locked onto Miniand for the first time in 8 months. I saw it. Fear. Real, primal, unfiltered fear. He stepped toward me. I told you to stay out of sight, he hissed under his breath, barely loud enough for the room to hear. This is not your place. Get back to your station before you ruin everything. But I didn't move. I looked at him. Then I looked at the table of decision-makers, holding their pens mid-sentence. And I said, calmly, actually, I think it's time we had a different kind of conversation. Silence. The kind that stretches across a room and bends time. I stood there still in my wrinkled gray uniform, still holding the mop handle in one hand, and looked around the glass-walled conference room at 12 of the most powerful decision-makers in the healthcare industry. They were staring back at me, expressions ranging from puzzled to annoyed. Ethan was already moving toward me, his smile brittle and melting fast. This is a closed meeting, he snapped. Security will escort you. I won't be long, I said, cutting him off without raising my voice. But I believe the executives deserve to know who I really am. There was a flicker of hesitation in the room. The lead executive, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a sharper posture, spoke first. Who exactly are you? I reached into the side pocket of my uniform and pulled out a black badge holder. Slowly, deliberately, I flipped it open and laid it flat on the table beside the notepads and printed agendas. Chloe Reed, Senior Auditor, Corporate Ethics Division. Kensley Consulting. Murmurs spread like a ripple through the room. Pens were set down. Spines straightened. Ethan froze mid-step. His face drained of color. Wait, what is this? He said, his voice suddenly thinner. She's a temp, from HR. She's not. This is a stunt. No, I replied calmly. This is an independent assessment. 8 months embedded within PulseVista, as requested by the Global Care Evaluation Board. I pulled the second item from my uniform pocket, a slim gray folder marked with a security seal. I've documented 126 instances of wage violations, 74 policy breaches, 42 internal complaints that never reached HR because employees were too afraid to file them, including cases of verbal abuse, public humiliation, forced unpaid overtime, and retaliation against staff who attempted to speak up. Oh, I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence did it for me. This isn't a disgruntled workers' rant, I continued. This is a formal culture audit, backed by evidence, interviews, and memory logs. Ethan laughed, but it came out broken. She's exaggerating. This is absurd. There's no proof. Actually, said the lead executive, her eyes never leaving mine. We've used Kensley before. They don't exaggerate. He tried again. She's misinterpreting company culture. I'm firm, sure, but everyone here knows we operate with intensity. That's what gets results. Intensity, I said, locking eyes with him, is not the same as intimidation. And then, I dropped the final nail. This morning 41 minutes ago you told me, in front of your staff, to get back to cleaning because, and I quote, it's the only thing your brain can handle. 12 pairs of eyes turned to him. No one said a word. His mouth opened. Closed. then opened again. Nothing came out. If you've ever watched a bully realize the room no longer believes them, you know this moment. It doesn't come with fireworks, it comes with silence and consequences. Hit subscribe if you're still with me, because the fallout, it's only just begun. The lead executive turned to her colleagues and said flatly, "I've heard enough." Ethan took a step forward, panicked now. "You can't base a partnership decision on this." "We're not," she interrupted. "We're basing it on a verified evaluation from the most respected ethics firm in the industry." And just like that, the energy in the room shifted. The masks fell. The game was over. But the consequences? They were just getting started. The room emptied faster than I expected. No drawn-out debates. No last-minute rescues. Just 12 chairs scraping back from the glass table, briefcases quietly snapping shut, and one final sentence from the lead executive as she reached for the door. "This partnership no longer aligns with our values." That was it. $500 million in projected contracts gone in a sentence. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, blinking, as the boardroom doors swung shut behind them. I stayed still. No smirk. No satisfaction. Just presence. I watched him crumble, inch by inch, from the inside out. First came the denial. "This isn't real," he mumbled, pacing back toward the head of the table. "They'll reconsider, they'll talk to legal, they can't just walk away from that kind of money." Then came the bargaining. "I can fix this," he muttered. "I'll draft a memo. I'll blame miscommunication. They don't know how hard it is to manage people like this." "No. People like this," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the empty room, but we both knew who he meant. Finally, came the silence. The kind of silence that swells when the illusion shatters and all that's left is the sound of your own empire collapsing around you. By noon, the story had already started to leak. One of the executives must have made a call. Or maybe someone on the Pulse Vista comms team got sloppy. Either way, by 3 p.m., the whispers became a roar. Pulse Vista loses. 500 deal over ethics scandal. CEO accused of wage theft and employee harassment. Anonymous report triggers corporate crisis. My name wasn't in the articles. It didn't have to be. The internal emails came next. First, from legal. Then HR. Then the board. By end of day, Ethan had been placed on administrative leave pending full investigation. He didn't take it well. I heard he slammed the door on his way out of the office. Someone said he cursed at the receptionist. Someone else said he tried to take his office chair with him. But the truth? None of that mattered. Because the damage was already done. The Monday after, Pulse Vista's stock opened 12% lower. Shareholders called emergency meetings. Clients paused renewals. Journalists camped outside the building. And the leadership team scrambled for a narrative that didn't exist. You can't PR spin a culture built on cruelty. And you can't unring a bell that loud. Ethan Cole, the man who once barked at me to fetch coffee, the man who mocked my intelligence in front of clients, the man who thought fear was the same thing as leadership, was now radioactive. Unhireable. Untouchable. Unraveling. It was poetic, in a way. Not because he lost the deal, but because he lost control. The very thing he built his identity around, dominance, authority, image, was the first thing to evaporate when the truth came out. And while his world was burning down around him, I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just walked past his corner office, now half-packed in cardboard boxes, and whispered to myself, respect is free, but the lack of it can cost everything. It didn't all happen at once. The story faded from headlines in about a week, replaced by something shinier, louder, more marketable. But inside the company, and in the lives of people who'd lived under Ethan's shadow, the aftershocks lasted a long time. It started with small things. The break room got quieter, then warmer. People spoke again, not just about deadlines and deliverables, but actual ideas. They started showing up to meetings with questions instead of fear. Laughter, the real kind, started returning to the building like sunlight through cracked blinds. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Chloe? A soft voice. Hesitant, familiar. It's Ella. From finance. 2. Hope it's okay that I called. Of course, I remembered her. Ella Martin, the woman who once cried quietly into her keyboard after Ethan had ripped her apart in a budget meeting. How are things over there now? I asked. She paused. Better. So much better. They brought in a new interim director. Her name's Anna. She actually listens. Like, really listens. She asks for our thoughts before making changes. She even thanked me for catching an accounting error last week. Thanked me. Can you believe that? There was a smile in her voice now. It made my throat tighten. I wanted to thank you, she continued. I know you didn't do it for us, but it saved us anyway. I didn't know what to say. Because she was right. When I started this assignment, it wasn't about redemption or rescue. It was about assessment, about accountability, about doing my job. But somewhere along the way, it became something more. A reckoning. For months, I had watched good people shrink under the weight of one man's ego. I had watched bright minds second-guess themselves, experienced professionals walk away from careers they once loved. Now, slowly, they were starting to rebuild. Not just the company. Themselves. I started getting emails from employees across departments some I barely spoke to during the operation. They told me about new policies HR had adopted, about anonymous feedback forms that were finally being read, about a company-wide meeting where the interim CEO admitted out loud that the old culture had failed them all. There was something powerful about that. Not just the removal of a toxic figure, but the open acknowledgement that what happened was real and that it mattered. The ripple wasn't just internal. Other companies began reaching out to Kensley Consulting. CEOs who once brushed off culture audits as optional now called them essential. I was asked to lead new evaluations in other firms, even speak at 2 corporate summits. But it wasn't the public recognition that stayed with me. It was Ella's call. The shaky courage in her voice. The hope. Sometimes, change doesn't look like a revolution. It looks like a woman going back to work without feeling small. It looks like a meeting where no one flinches when their name is called. It looks like a workplace that finally remembers it's made of pioplanot productivity. And in those quiet, steady ripples, I saw something more powerful than revenge. I saw healing. It's been 3 years. 3 years since I picked up a mop and let Ethan Cole write the last sentence of his career. 3 years since I walked out of Pulse Vista not as a temp, not as a ghost but as Chloe Reed, the woman who dismantled a culture with silence and precision. I've done a lot of evaluations since then. Bigger companies, trickier operations, cases where the rot ran deeper and the stakes climbed higher. But none of them stuck with me like that one. None of them had quite the same echo. Because what happened at Pulse Vista didn't just end with a broken CEO or a canceled contract. It became a case study, a warning, a signal flare for everything that can go wrong when charisma masks cruelty. I've stood in lecture halls where professors now teach the Cole collapse as a masterclass in leadership failure. I've been invited to closed-door panels on workplace ethics and systemic manipulation. I've consulted on new federal guidelines for internal accountability audits. And every time someone says, I heard about that Ethan guy, I know it's not really about him anymore. It's about what he represented. For a while, I kept his name out of my mouth. I didn't want my work tied to his. But over time, I realized something. Mitchell, Ethan, Brian, Susan. It doesn't matter the name. The pattern is always the same. Someone builds their authority on fear. Someone else suffers in silence. Until one day, someone speaks. And everything changes. That's the legacy. Not mine. Not his. Ours. The employees who stayed. The ones who walked. The interns who were told they weren't enough. The veterans who were pushed out because they had boundaries. Every story I documented became a stitch in something bigger than retribution. It became proof that culture matters, that people matter, that leadership is more than KPIs and charisma, that how you treat those with the least power says the most about who you are. People sometimes ask me if I'd do it again, if I'd go undercover, get humiliated, be underestimated, sacrifice months of my life to expose one man's empire of ego. And the answer is yes. Every time. Without hesitation. Because when it works, it doesn't just end a toxic reign. It prevents the next one. It shows others employees, students, even strangers on the internet that silence isn't the only option. That staying quiet might keep you safe, but speaking up? It might save someone else. And sometimes, it might save hundreds. So, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you weren't executive material, leave a comment below and tell me how you rose above it. Hit that like button if this story reminded you that power isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who chooses to speak when it matters. And if you want more stories of quiet strength and unapologetic truth, you know what to do. Subscribe. The next one's coming soon.